All right, we are live, and it is Tuesday night. It is the Panther-Lair Show on the Panther-Lair.com YouTube, the live stream. Appreciate everybody starting to filter in as we do every Tuesday night, getting a lot of the regular faces showing up, chiming in, saying hello. We're glad to see everyone. And, of course, we appreciate everybody listening to the podcast throughout the week as it goes on. Few things, of course, to tend to. We got to mention Home Field Apparel right off the top. Those guys are great. They make a great product. I've got a Home Field shirt on right now. You can't see it because I'm wearing a flannel shirt because it's cold today on Tuesday. But I've got the Home Field T-shirt underneath. It's got rock on it. I can show it to you later if you need. But, I mean, you could go to homefieldapparel.com. Check out the rock shirt they have. Check out all the Pitt shirts they have. They've got great designs. It's two things, and it's always two things with any T-shirt company that you're going to talk about, or apparel company or whatever it is. One, you've got to have high-quality material. It's like wings, right? It's like not wings, that store that you buy all the touristy stuff from in the Outer Banks, but wings, right? You can go to these places for wings that have a million different flavors, and that's great. It's great to have a lot of different flavors. I love trying them all. They taste great. I love it. I love a lot of the different wild flavors. Sometimes you want just a regular buffalo, but you like mixing it up every now and then with all these different crazy flavors. Although, guys, please, when you make your wings with all these different flavors, give them a name that's descriptive. I don't know what blue jean baby wings taste like. I have no idea what that means. Tell me what your wings are. But I love it when they have 100 different flavors. It's great. I love those places. But if you don't have a high quality wing that you're starting with, you lost me a little bit. If I bite into it and I'm trying your 100 different flavors, I'm very excited. But if your wing is crap, I don't want to eat bad meat. You know what I mean? I don't want to eat bad wings. And it's kind of that way for me with T-shirts. I love really cool designs, and Home Field has some amazing designs. They really sort of crowdsourced it, also dug into the history and kind of the legacy of each of these schools that they represent, that they have licensing deals with, and they come up with really cool designs, really incredible stuff. But they've also, and I can't stress this enough, they've got really high quality shirts. This shirt is so soft. It's why I'm wearing it underneath this flannel shirt today, because it's this one of the softest shirts I own. I have one of their sweatshirts too. Super soft, super comfortable, keeps its shape really well. I can't say enough good things about Home Field Apparel. You got to go check them out. You got to check out their Pitt collection. You got to check out their collection of shirts that they have for other schools too, because they have licensing deals with a lot of schools. It seems like they're adding a new one every week. They're writing about these guys in the Athletic. I mean, this is a company on the rise, and they're making great Pitt stuff. So homefieldapparel.com, go check them out. They make great products. They support us. Definitely you should go and support them, because they make just great Pitt gear. And you're a Pitt fan, you're always looking for new Pitt stuff, and you don't want the same thing everybody else has. Everybody's got a James Conner jersey. Everybody's got a Larry Fitzgerald jersey. Get something a little unique. Get something a little different that not everybody else is going to have, and it's super high quality, and it looks really cool on top of it. So homefieldapparel.com, go check that out. That's the place to be. I mean, that's they have great stuff. They really do. I can't say enough good things about them. Homefieldapparel.com, really high quality. Hope everybody's got something cold to drink tonight. We've got ARCs as always. These guys don't. This is not a sponsored deal here with ARCs, I'll tell you that. I mean, I tend to, if there are things that are sponsored and I'm endorsing them, I try to endorse things I actually, believe in. If it was some kind of weird, I don't know. What's a product that gets, advertised, a pillow or CBD oil or something like that. And I was like, I don't know, this product's weird. I don't know if I could really have my heart in it. But like the stuff that gets sponsored here, whether it was the beers we used to have in the past or the Home Field stuff, or different, items and products like that, like I try to really endorse it, sincerely. And ARCs beer is not a sponsor of the podcast, but we're going to give them a shout out anyway, because the whole beer thing on the podcast started with me just naturally having a beer while I taped the podcast way back when, 2, 3, 4 years ago. I would always just have a beer, and then it just sort of kind of worked out that we got sort of not sponsorship, but promotional considerations with different beers. And so, I was like, oh, this is just natural. I'll talk about the beers I'm drinking. And that's kind of where we are right now. This is RX. They're over on 65 in Emsworth. It's a gluten-free brewery, all gluten-free. It's not crafted to remove gluten. It's a gluten-free craft brewery. And this is their hazy IPA. It's an award-winning hazy IPA. And it's really good. I've been drinking their pumpkin ale a lot lately, but this hazy is so good. They finally got it back in. They were out for the longest time. They won an award, and then they didn't have any of these beers. I would call them and be like, hey, guys, you got the hazy, and where's the hazy? Well, they got it, and it's awesome. So check that out. If you're trying to go gluten-free, you're trying to follow that kind of a diet, or have some nutritional changes, you might think you don't have good options for beer out there. You might think you're going to have to drink Trulies all winter long. Well, you don't. You can find some really good beers. So go check them out. Those are my endorsements of the week, or my personal endorsements of the week. And I recommend that you give those a look. So here we are, jumping into the Pitt conversation. And obviously a week ago, we sat there on Tuesday night and we reflected on the Florida State win, and we talked about how that game went, and we talked about Georgia Tech and how Pitt was going to do against Georgia Tech and how they had a chance to carry on the momentum and blah, 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 and all this. And a few days later, the Georgia Tech game gets postponed due to COVID-19 protocols, is what they're saying. I mean, I think there were positive tests, and then I think there were a number of players who just weren't going to be available due to contact tracing because the test results weren't going to be back in time. Particularly once you start dealing with a road game, which I think is really a complicating factor. If you've got some positive tests on your team, right, you've got this nucleus of positive tests, however many may be, and I'm not going to even speculate on a number because I don't know what that number is, but you got some positive tests on the team, and then you have sort of the outer ring, a bigger ring of guys that are all, contact tracing. You saw it with like Ben Roethlisberger and some of those guys with the Steelers last week. You have to sort of address it with all of them. And all these guys are getting tested frequently. But you find out, you got positives from some of these guys. We have to test the guys around them again. And while you're waiting for those test results, you can't put those guys on a plane with the rest of your team. You can't fly like that. And you might not even get the subsequent test results back in time for the game. So they had to postpone it. I mean, it was a combination of factors. But it's the first time Pitt has had a game affected by this. I mean, aside from, the whole damn season. This is the first time that Pitt has had a game affected by this. And it's got me a little shook up. Not in, some kind of emotional way, but it's thrown me off as far as, look, for all of us since March, everything in life has been tentative. Everything in life has been in flux. We've had to adapt a lot, and very frequently, sometimes within the same week, whether it's if you have kids in school, whether you yourself are going to school, if your job went working remote, if your job like me is covering college sports and college, training camp or spring camp gets canceled and prospect camps never happen. Recruits are never able to go on the road. Training camp happens, but it's all behind closed doors. The schedule gets changed. I mean, everything in life we've had to adapt over the last 8 months now, and we've all learned that everything is tentative and things can be taken away very abruptly. I think we all learned that lesson when all of a sudden conference championships were getting canceled and college basketball, and then the NCAA tournament was getting canceled, and pro sports were getting put on hold. We know at any point we can lose some of these things. We know at any point there could be an issue that comes up that will take some of this away, that we're not going to be able to, you can't count on anything happening. We know that. And we've known that. I mean, look, we sat here in August and talked about how I didn't think a season was going to happen. I did not think they were going to play football this fall. I didn't believe it. I was very much in the camp of saying, I will believe it when I see it. And I didn't think I was ever going to see it. And so that mindset, that tentative mindset has always been there. So you always know this kind of thing can happen. But they made it so far. They made it 10 weeks into the season, 8 games. They didn't play in week 1, and then they had an off week in there. And they made it, 8 games, 9 weeks, 10 weeks into the season, and they were doing really well, and they hadn't really had any impact. The first game they had 7 guys who had to be absent from the game due to COVID protocols. The next week, the Syracuse game, they had 3 guys, and then they had no one. Up until the Florida State game, they announced that there was 1 player who had to be absent due to COVID protocols. And so I don't want to say I was lulled to sleep on the possibility that a game could be canceled or postponed at any moment, that one of these games could be taken away. But I was a little bit. And maybe Pitt was too. Maybe some of the players who have done such a good job to this point, keeping themselves out of trouble and staying clean of this whole thing, staying clear of this whole thing. Maybe they got lulled to sleep a little bit and maybe didn't take it as seriously as they needed to. Some of the players even sort of said that this week, that maybe they kind of forgot how seriously they have to take it. They forgot how, sort of diligent they have to be, and they let their guard down, and now they've got an issue. But I was sort of lulled to sleep a little bit on it. I sort of came to believe, well, man, they're going to finish the whole season. They're going to play the whole season. They're actually not going to have any issues. They've done such a good job so far. So then when something like this happens, I wasn't expecting it at all. I think Pitt made the announcement on Thursday, maybe Friday. I forget what day. No, it was Thursday, I guess it was. Pitt made the announcement on Thursday. We started hearing some rumors about it Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, a little bit before the announcement was actually made. And it was like a load of bricks. Not because this was some huge game I was looking forward to. This wasn't a championship game. This is Georgia Tech. This is Pitt playing at Georgia Tech on a channel that I don't even get. I still hadn't figured out how I was going to even watch this damn game, because I got Hulu for the fall season, so I could watch all the games on the ACC network. I got Hulu Live, and they don't have this AT&T Root Sports, whatever the heck it is. They don't have that channel on Hulu Live. And I was like, well, how am I even going to watch this? And I was going to have to find some weird workaround to even watch the game. So, in some respects, I wasn't shocked or knocked, down a peg or taken aback, because of the game itself, but because it was such a stark reminder that these things can be taken away so abruptly, that so quickly and sort of without warning and kind of out of nowhere, it could just be gone. And it wasn't entirely out of nowhere. I mean, we've seen issues across the country, and certainly in Allegheny County. I mean, things have not been getting better. They've been getting worse. Considerably worse, appreciably worse, over the past few weeks. And so thinking that it would not ultimately touch the Pitt football program was foolish. It was foolish and was ignorant of the reality that is in the world right now, nationally and locally. But it finally sort of touched Pitt, and now I don't know about you, but I'm in a weird place with thinking about this team right now. I mean, I got, I'm writing about them every day. I'm digging into stats. On Wednesday, we got this big, inside the numbers column with all kinds of deep dives on Pitt's red zone offense and Kenny Pickett and how he's playing this year, and the running game and where they're having success, where, in which direction they run, if they run between the right guard and the right tackle, or outside the right end, or, or outside the tight end to the left, or between the guard and the center, whatever it is. I mean, we dug really deep for a lot of stats, and I think it's interesting. And it was interesting to put together. It changed my perspective about a few things, and it reinforced my perspective on a few things with Pitt's offense. So I haven't checked out on this team, but having that game taken away, and now there's 2 games left in the regular season. The Georgia Tech game was, I guess, rescheduled for December 12th. So 3 games ultimately still left in the regular season. They're not going to the ACC championship game. They haven't been mathematically eliminated yet, but they will, probably as soon as this weekend. I don't want to say that there's not a whole lot to play for, but I kind of need this team to get out there on the field on Saturday and kind of draw everybody back in, draw some interest back in. Because when you lost a game, when a game just vanished like that, like the one did last Saturday, and then you look down the rest of the schedule and it's Virginia Tech at home and on the road at Clemson, and then that's it. And then you've got the weird off week on the 5th, and then you've got Georgia Tech maybe being played on the 12th. It's, that's the tentative plan. I don't know. It's like I say, it's not like I've checked out, on this team. I mean, obviously I'm not. It's my job. You know what I mean? I'm still following this team, but they're fading out of mind a little bit because they've been out of sight. This wasn't a regular off week. This was a week where, I mean, they just disappeared. Due to the COVID issues, and it's a fingers crossed situation that they're going to be back on the field this week, because I don't think these issues go away like that. If you've got something sort of spreading through your program, there's 105 guys that can ultimately sabotage your opportunity to go out and play on Saturday. Now, they were able to get back on the practice field on Tuesday. That's a positive sign, step in the right direction, but I don't think they're out of the woods yet. And I think it's a good sign that they practiced, but Saturday's going to be really interesting. And if they do play on Saturday, it's going to be really interesting to see who is available, because I don't think they're going to have the whole team available. I think they're going to be guys who are absent due to COVID protocols, potentially more than they've had for any game this season, including the Austin Peay game when they had 7 guys out. So I don't know. It's a weird time right now. And I mean, it's 2020. Everything's weird. Everything's up in the air. Everything's tentative. And like I said, I mean, we understand all of this, but it's a weird time right now. And like I said, I think the best thing that could happen is they get back out on the field and play football again and sort of, I don't know, bring everything back into focus a little bit because it's sort of faded, I think. But maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just me sitting here on a Tuesday night, rambling, and maybe not everybody else is having that same sort of reaction to things. But let's check in here and see what's going on with the chat here on let's see, on the live stream. This is always the fun part about doing this live stream. Like I always say, the longest time I just did a podcast, tape it on Sunday night or tape it on Thursday or whenever it was, and release it on Monday, release it on Friday. You would listen to it and maybe you had a reaction to it, maybe you didn't. Sometimes people would post on the message board. Sometimes people would tweet at me a response to something I said. But the good thing about these live streams is, in addition to getting to watch me drink my beer, you can actually interact and post comments and post questions. And of course, you can use the super chat function. Throw a couple bucks to the podcast, get your comment in there read and your question answered for sure. So let's jump into the chat here and start off. Matt Durney hit the ground running. UCLA and Cal were able to schedule a game on 4 days' notice last week. Looking at Pitt's future schedules to get West Virginia from 2022 to 2025, it shouldn't be hard to extend this another 6 years. Give the people what they want. Yeah, I don't see any reason not to keep the West Virginia series going beyond its current four-year contract. I guess the only hang-up would be if there are questions or concerns or if there's uncertainty about what the conferences are going to look like, 5 years from now, 6 years from now. Particularly if these conferences are going to go, if the ACC is going to go to a 9-game conference schedule. I think that would be perhaps prohibitive or work against adding another annual Power 5 non-conference opponent like West Virginia. I think if the ACC were to go to a 9-game conference schedule, I think a lot of schools, including Pitt, would probably have those other 3 games looking like an FCS and 2 non-Power 5 FBS teams, and then 9 ACC teams. Okay, with occasionally Notre Dame being one of the non-conference teams, assuming Notre Dame keeps that 5-game-a-year arrangement with the ACC. We never really even talked about that. A real quick thought on that. Pat Narduzzi had some comments, I guess it was a week ago, about Notre Dame being in the ACC being in the ACC just for this year and then having the 5-game-a-year arrangement. And he said, basically, the ACC should tell Notre Dame, hey, you're either in or you're out, and if you're out, go find other opponents to play or this kind of thing. I don't think Pat Narduzzi was on point about that. I think he was off base quite a bit in that regard. It would be best for the ACC to have Notre Dame as a full-time member. Failing that, this is the next best option. There isn't a conference in the country that would not take the arrangement that the ACC has with Notre Dame right now. Every conference would take that. Big 10, Big 12, SEC, and Pac-12, and definitely all the Group of 5 conferences. Every other Power 5 conference would take the arrangement with Notre Dame that that the ACC has right now, because it's one step closer to having them in the conference as a football member. And you're closer to having them in than any other conference in the country. If the Big 10 had the option to add Notre Dame for 5 games a year, they would do it. Same with the Big 12, same with the Pac-12, same with the SEC. The ACC is the lucky one. They got it. And look, when push came to shove and Notre Dame felt like it had to join a conference even just for 1 year, where did they go? They didn't go to the Big 10 or the Big 12 or the SEC or the Pac-12. They went to the ACC. You're still in the best position, and having this deal probably helps you in this regard. You're still in the best position that if Notre Dame ever decides to join a conference, you'll be the one that they join as the ACC. And having this deal, I think, helps that. It creates more familiarity. It creates more relationships. It makes it feel like more of a natural fit. Plus the fact that you've got Notre Dame in for all the other sports. You know what I mean? You've got them in for basketball. You've got them in for whatever else they play. Basketball is the big one, though. You're building that familiarity and that comfort level so that if Notre Dame football ever decides to join a conference, the ACC should be the top one on the list. And the most difficult thing about it, though, and I'll leave it at this, people always talk about Notre Dame has the NBC deal and it's the money they get. It's not about the money. I don't think it's about the money for Notre Dame when it comes to having their own sort of exclusive deal with NBC. I think they would make more money joining the ACC, quite frankly, or any of the Power 5 conferences. They would make more TV money than they currently get from their NBC deal. It's about prestige. It's about conceit. It's about thinking they are something different from everyone else, thinking they are something better than everyone else. That's what it's about. Feeling like they are unique. They are the University of College Football in America. They're the only ones that have an exclusive national TV broadcast rights deal just for their one school. And they want to keep it that way. And until they change that, or the ACC finds a way to make it work in their conference, broadcast rights structure, I don't think they're going to join a conference. And again, it's not about the money. It's about the prestige and Notre Dame's high opinion of itself. Let's see here. Joe Lanzell says, Chris, would an up-and-coming head coach prefer to go to Pitt or South Carolina? Well, that's a good question. It probably, I think there are a lot of factors that go into a coach's decision on where to go. If a coach has options, if a coach has the opportunity to go to Pitt or South Carolina, it'll depend on their background. It'll depend on how they feel about what's University of South Carolina, is it Columbia, how they feel culturally about Columbia versus Pittsburgh, how they feel about the ACC versus the SEC, and then, of course, how they feel about the paychecks. And, I think Pitt, the next time it's hiring a football coach, will probably pay a pretty hefty sum. I think they'll be willing, and I think they paid a pretty decent sum to get Pat Narduzzi. I think they're willing to pay a competitive salary. South Carolina is in the SEC is probably willing to pay more. And I think, people always talk about Pitt being cheap or Pitt needing to open up the pocketbooks or write the checks and all these kinds of things. And I think you can do that, but you can also still lose out in bidding wars. And this is fresh in my mind because we just had this conversation about Matt Canada on the message boards. Somebody suggested that Pitt didn't do enough to keep Matt Canada after the 2016 season when he ultimately left and went to LSU to be the offensive coordinator there for the Tigers. And I said, they actually did. They offered Matt Canada more money than they've ever paid an assistant coach. They offered him a ton of money. They pushed the limits, pushed beyond what their limits previously had been. And it still wasn't enough because they ultimately ran into one of the dozen or so teams in college football that are willing to spend above and beyond really what's rational. And I think Pitt went beyond what it really believes is rational to try and keep Matt Canada. They just had the bad luck of running into one of those teams that really it's very difficult to outbid. I think even if Pitt had pushed the limits further, I don't know if they would have gotten to a point where LSU said, okay, that's too much for us. Because it's LSU, and they're just going to keep running the money up. And at some point, if you're Pitt, if you're 55 of the of the 66 teams or whatever it is in Power 5 conferences, at some point you say that's as much as we can offer. That we've gone beyond what we wanted to offer. That's as much as we can do. And I don't know if South Carolina has the same approach to its head coaching job as LSU had to its offensive coordinator. And clearly, I mean, Pitt's not going to be looking for a head coach this offseason, so they're not going to be going head-to-head against South Carolina. But if that situation ever came up where Pitt and South Carolina were going head-to-head for a coach, it depends on how sort of ridiculous or SEC-ish South Carolina would want to be. And then, would an up-and-coming head coach prefer Pitt or South Carolina? It would probably depend on how much money is being offered and then how they felt, ACC versus SEC and Columbia or wherever it is versus Pittsburgh. And so I don't know if there's one obvious answer there. I think both programs have something to offer. They're both in competitive Power 5 conferences, but obviously there are some significant differences. TRR says best guess on the rest of the seniors maybe coming back or not coming back other than Rashad Weaver and Patrick Jones. I don't know. I don't have a great feel for it right now. We're obviously not around the players a lot, not around the coaches a lot to really get a feel for that kind of thing. I think some guys probably have their minds made up. Some guys don't. It's going to be really interesting on Saturday to see which seniors are honored before the game. It is senior day. And so you would think that guys who definitely don't want to come back or don't plan to come back would go out and walk and be honored. Although, it's entirely possible some guys could go out and do it and then end up coming back. I think Damar Hamlin was honored last year at senior day, and then he decided to come back. It would be great if Damar Hamlin got honored in 2019, came back and played in 2020, gets recognized on senior day in 2020, decides to come back again and has 3 senior days. That would be, I would like to see that from Damar Hamlin. I think if you're talking in terms of guys that Pitt would like to have back or could most benefit from having back, I think you start right off the top with Kenny Pickett and Jimmy Morrissey. I mean, obviously, Rashad Weaver and Patrick Jones would be huge to get those guys back, but I don't see that happening. I don't think that's very likely to happen. If you could get Kenny Pickett and Jimmy Morrissey to both come back, I mean, that'd be huge for this offense going into the 2021 season. I think we did talk last week about how this defense looks like they're in good shape to reload for 2021 and really not drop off too much despite the loss of Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver. I think there are guys who could end up coming back and even improve that situation even more. But, I mean, on the offense, you're really looking for, Kenny Pickett. Is he going to come back and play another season on the heels of what has been, to this point, through 8 games total and 6 games that he has played, it's been his best season as a starter at Pitt. Will he come back? If he does, that's huge for the offense. It's huge for the team. You add him together with a defense that I think will be pretty strong for another year. And, you got potential for a pretty good team. You got potential for a pretty successful team. You throw in Jimmy Morrissey or Bryce Hargrove. I think he's been a pretty solid offensive lineman. Those guys are both seniors this year. I think those would probably be the 2 or 3 that I would circle first on the offensive side. Lucas Krull coming back would be big. I think he needs another year, and I think I'd really like to see what he can do. Otherwise, on offense, I think most of the strength is in the youth. Defensively, outside of those defensive ends, I mean, I think Phil Campbell's a really good player. I think having him back would be big. I think the corners will be really interesting to watch. Jason Pinnock and Damari Mathis. I don't know what those guys' draft prospects look like right now. I don't think Pinnock has had a great senior season, and Mathis got hurt and missed the whole year. So he was going to have an extra year anyway. he was going to be able to come back because he would have used his red shirt this year, so he would be a redshirt senior in 2021. Getting one or both of those guys back for next season would be pretty big. And Damar Hamlin, of course, sort of self-explanatory there. I'll tell you who else. A guy like Kirk Christodoulou, although he might be a redshirt junior now. I feel like he came in 2017. I got to check that. I'm going to look it up while we talk here on the podcast. I'm going to try and multitask, bring up his page, his profile page on Pitt's website. Yeah, he's a redshirt junior, so Christodoulou will be back. Kessman is a senior, so that would be an interesting one, although obviously he's had his inconsistencies this year, and there's some questions about that. It'd be interesting to see if they move on to a guy like Ben Sauls, or I guess he would be the next one up, but those would probably be the main guys I would circle. Maybe Kessman, the two corners, possibly Damar Hamlin. Phil Campbell, I think, is a good player as an outside linebacker, and then obviously your quarterback and your quarterback and your center. I mean, getting those guys back would be pretty. That would be big. I think that would be pretty significant for this team if they want to come back. But I don't know. Don't know what they're planning right now. Let's see. Brock Madonic says, what are your expectations for these last 3 games and your outlook on where Pitt can land for a bowl destination? And then John Kristofich, I apologize, John. You told me how to pronounce his last week, and I forgot, and I'm screwing it up again. John says Pitt will beat Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech and then lose to Clemson in between the two. I kind of agree with John on that one. I think they should beat Virginia Tech. They should beat Georgia Tech. They probably won't beat Clemson. The wild card in all of that is who they have available. You know what I mean? If there are still COVID issues surrounding this team, if they're still having problems and they're still going to have guys sitting out, and I think there will be guys sitting out this weekend, that could change the equation of what this game looks like. And who knows? Virginia Tech will probably have some guys sitting out. I think they had guys sitting out last week. And so that makes it tough to predict what's going to happen. I think they can beat Virginia Tech. Should they beat Virginia Tech? Yeah. I would say it's tough to say. Pitt's a 4-4 team right now. I think they're good enough to beat Virginia Tech. So I guess I would say that. They should beat Georgia Tech, particularly if it's, a month from now. And then Clemson, Clemson's always going to be a challenge. That you knew that from before the season. When the schedule got announced and you believed you had everybody available, it was always going to be a challenge. And that was with Jalen Twyman and Paris Ford. It was going to be difficult to win that game, let alone some of the other guys who've gotten injured. And then, this question marks about COVID protocols. So that's going to be hard to win. But if you could beat Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech, you finish 6-5. Where do they go for a bowl? I have no idea. Once you're in that sort of not top range, not top tier of bowls, it's kind of one faceless mass, you know what I mean, of just random sponsors and random bowl names and random destinations. And you could be going to Detroit or Orlando or Nashville or wherever, and it doesn't really matter. It's all kind of the same. New York City, or I should say the Bronx or Annapolis. It's all basically the same. And that's probably where Pitt will end up, one of those places, one of those bowl games, assuming those bowls all still take place and assuming Pitt is able to finish the season. So, again, not to cop out, but everything's tentative. You know what I mean? Everything is tentative right now. S-Mac says the Sharks are circling Khalil Anderson. That's not a question, my man. It's not a question, but we will talk about it, though. Khalil Anderson, cornerback recruit, cornerback commit for Pitt out of the class of 2021. Kid from Georgia, committed to Pitt in June. He had a bunch of offers, like 20-some offers, but he really was focused on Pitt and Michigan State. And so there's a recruiting dead period. The NCAA says recruits can't have in-person contact with college coaches, so they can't take visits. And so Khalil Anderson and his family, they fly from Atlanta to Detroit. They rent a car, drive to East Lansing, and check it out. Tour Michigan State's campus on their own, no coaches allowed. And then they get in their car, they drive to Pittsburgh, check out Pitt, drive back to Detroit, fly home to Atlanta, and he commits to Pitt. Khalil Anderson might be the best recruit in Pitt's class right now. He might be the number one. If he's not number one, he's in the top 3. He's really good. He's a stud cornerback, and as such, he's gotten a lot of renewed interest. Miami offered him last week. That's a problem. And some other schools are starting to poke around as well. Clemson showing some interest. I think Georgia's showing a little bit of interest, it seems like. It's going to be tough, I think, for Pitt to hold on to Khalil Anderson. And they've, really since, the last few years, they've lost 1 or 2 guys each year. 1 or 2 early commitments they've lost. It's sort of become part of it, and it's kind of part of college football recruiting nowadays. You're going to have some decommitments, particularly when you get a lot of early commitments. Anderson will be a tough one to lose. That would hurt. But it's going to be a battle, and it's going to be tough, particularly given all the challenges of recruiting in 2021. And so, I don't know what's going to happen there. Anderson is kind of quiet. He doesn't keep a lot of contact, with recruiting reporters, so we don't have a great feel for him. We just kind of talk to different sources, and I think Pitt is, I don't know if I would say Pitt is concerned, but they know they're in for a battle. They're going to have to fight to hold on to Anderson, even if they're just trying to fight off Miami. And if Clemson gets involved or Georgia gets involved with an offer, it's going to be even more challenging. So, yeah, the Sharks are circling, and that's going to be really tough. Jason Martell says, tough question to answer, I realize, but what odds do you give Pitt bringing in a transfer quarterback next year if Pickett goes pro? Not great. To be honest with you, a part of it would depend on what Joey Yellen and Davis Bevel and Nick Patty decide to do. If Pickett doesn't return for 2021, they'll go into the offseason with, Nick Patty is a redshirt junior, Joey Yellen and Davis Bevel as redshirt sophomores, and then Nate Yarnell coming in as a true freshman. And I think if they could keep those 4, they would be happy with those guys. It's going to be a question of whether or not they can keep those 4 all the way through the 2021 season, and I'm not entirely sure if they can. Quarterbacks transfer. This is what quarterbacks do in 2021, and it's been for the past couple years to the point where, and I've said this, just knocked something off the desk behind my computer. It's really to the point where, and I've said this, that quarterback recruiting is different now than it was 10 years ago, because you're recruiting high school guys. You're trying to get high school quarterbacks and bring in that prospect as a freshman and develop him over the course of a few seasons and all that kind of thing. But that's not your only avenue to bring in quarterbacks. That's not your only way to find new quarterbacks to add to your roster. The transfer portal has very much become a source of roster fulfillment. And it's to the point where, yeah, you're going to try and get a high school guy, but you're not going to reach on a high school prospect because you'll be able to find someone in the transfer portal. So, you consider like the class of 2020, Pitt didn't sign a quarterback in this class, but they got Joey Yellen as a transfer from Arizona State, and that took some of the pressure off. So they had like a handful of targets, a handful of guys they were really sold on that Mark Whipple wanted to bring in. And they went after those guys, and they pursued them, and they didn't get any of them. But instead of going to their next tier of quarterbacks, instead of making desperation offers or bringing in guys they weren't entirely sold on, they were able to get Yellen, who came as a redshirt freshman. So effectively the same amount of eligibility left, and they got a guy that they believed in. So it's a whole other avenue to explore, and it really kind of changed has changed the equation when it comes to quarterback recruiting. So Pitt has Nate Yarnell committed in this 2021 class, kid out of Lake Travis High School in Austin, Texas. He looks like a good prospect, although he hasn't played at all this season due to a hand injury. He's hoping he can get back in the next couple of weeks and play in the playoffs, but that sort of up in the air remains to be seen. And they're after some guys in the 2022 class, and I think they would always like to get a high school recruit, but they're also going to be actively pursuing the transfer portal, and they're actively scouring the transfer portal. It's it's out there and it's available, and I think these staffs have guys who go through the portal all the time and watch for potential targets that they can go after. And I think with quarterbacks, where guys are going into the portal and transferring, after a year or two of being at a school, if they don't see a clear path to being the starter soon, they're hitting the road and transferring. And you look around the country, you see this everywhere. If you're a school like Pitt, or if you're most schools, that's very much a part of your recruiting strategy when it comes to quarterbacks. So you're not just looking at high schoolers. You're also looking at that transfer portal. So I think they're always going to be keeping an eye on it. I think if they lose Yellen or Bevel, maybe even Patty to the transfer portal, they'll look for another option there. But also if they miss out on their 2022 targets, they could potentially look for an option. If everything stands pat, if Kenny Pickett leaves, but they get the 3 upperclassmen returning and they get Nate Yarnell coming in, I don't see them going to the transfer portal unless there's a really obvious option that they're able to land. Otherwise, I think they'll stick with those 4 and work on trying to get a high school kid, in the class of 2022. Let's see here. Brock McDonagh says, what has been the surprise to you so far from this team? And what are your expectations for the basketball team? And any word if William Jeffers will play this year or redshirt? I'll start at the end. William Jeffers, I expect him to play. I expect everybody to play. You just don't see a lot of red shirts in college basketball. It happens from time to time, often injury related. If Jeffers is healthy, I think he'll get out there. Maybe it's only 5 to 7 minutes a game, maybe 10, maybe less. But I think he'll be out there and contributing, somewhere on the wing. Expectations for the basketball team, steady improvement. They won 6 ACC games last year. They went 6-14. Win a few more than that. You know what I mean? Get closer to 10-10. Get closer to, double-digit wins in the conference for the first time in a while. That's my expectation. Get closer, be more firmly in the bubble talk as the season is winding down. And somebody mentioned S-Mac asked about the NIT tournament. I don't know what's going on with that. I haven't heard that it's canceled, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been, and I just missed it. Get yourself into the NIT, be on the NCAA tournament bubble talk, get close to 500 in the ACC, and generally show improvement. I think that's the key. More than setting any sort of hard and fast line of, they got to win 10 in the conference. They got to make the NCAA tournament. They got to do this. They got to do that. Show improvement. I think they did show some steps forward last year from the previous season. This is year 3 for Jeff Capel now. You got to show more improvement. You have to keep it moving forward. That's my expectation. And if you want to put numbers on it, get as close to 10 conference wins as you can. And then surprise so far from the football team. I guess Servassier Dennis has been the biggest surprise, right? I think he's been, nobody saw that coming. Nobody saw his performance coming. When he signed with Pitt, when he committed to Pitt and took his official visit right before signing day and committed right before signing day, nobody said that guy in 2 years as a sophomore is going to be Pitt's leading tackler. And he's going to have 13.5 tackles for loss. And he's going to be a sort of versatile play everywhere linebacker who's a backup but plays as many snaps as the starters. Nobody predicted that. I didn't predict that. You didn't predict that. I don't know if Servassier Dennis predicted that. Maybe his parents did. The Pitt coaches didn't. So that's been the big. If you want to pick one individual, it's kind of an easy answer, actually. That's been the biggest surprise You know, on a broader level, I'm surprised that the offense didn't get any better. And I mean, we're saying this in the aftermath of a 40-point game. We're saying this in the aftermath of one of the best games the offense has played all season. They didn't really have any long possessions. They didn't drive the length of the field all that much, but they really, I mean, they were able to cash in all the turnovers that the defense generated, and they were able to cash in the good field position that the defense gave them, which hasn't always been a given with this offense. I really thought they would get better from last season to this year. I thought they would make more improvement from last year to this year than they did. And that's been the biggest sort of negative surprise. That's been the biggest disappointment to me in the last, of this season, is that the offense didn't improve more than it has. Let's see here. RJ Seaman 38, one of our super chatters. We always appreciate him checking in. He contributes to the podcast, and we appreciate that. Thank you for being one of our super chatters, man. 6-5 sounds doable, but does not change my anger about 2 1-point losses. I'm watching, but not vested. Yeah, look, those 1-point losses. Look, NC State and Boston College this year, they go in the same category as last year's Miami and Boston College games. And they go, and then the 2018, they go in the same category as the North Carolina and Stanford games in 2018. Slightly different circumstances for each of those seasons and each of those games. I think NC State and Boston College this year are the best out of those teams I just rattled off. I think the 2020 NC State and 2020 Boston College are better than 2019 Miami, 2019 Boston College, 2018 North Carolina, and 2018 Stanford. So there's not as much shame in losing to them this year, but losing both of those games as 1-point losses when they were winnable games and games Pitt really should have won. And those are the difference between being 4-4 and 6-2, or ultimately being 6-5 or 8-3. Those games stand out as the major impediment or the hindrance to what could have been. Last year 8-5 could have been 10-3. Should have been 10-3. The year before, 7-7, should have been 9-5 or whatever it is. This year, 4-4 should have been 6-2. They finished 6-5, should have been 8-3. Or if they finished 5-6, should have been 7-4. Because of those two games. Just like last year, it was because of those two games, Miami and Boston College. Just like the year before, it was because of those two games, North Carolina and Stanford. These are winnable games that Pitt really didn't have any business losing. They shouldn't have lost. And I think it's perfectly fair and legitimate that you still carry some frustration about those 2 1-point losses. You should. The team should. The coaches should. The players should. They should be pissed off about that because those were not good losses. What is a good loss? I think it's hard to quantify. I think Notre Dame in 2018 was a good loss. Last year, I don't know that there was a good loss last year. Virginia, maybe. Penn State was a good loss last year, actually. Penn State was a good loss in 2019. Not that it was good to lose, but I would not call that a bad loss. I would not call the Notre Dame game in 2018 a bad loss. Miami game this year, not a terrible loss. Frustrating because it was a winnable game. They very much could have won that game, and they did not. Notre Dame was a bad loss this year, not because Notre Dame was a bad team, but because they beat the crap out of Pitt. NC State and Boston College, I would call a bad loss, not because those teams are bad, but because those were very much winnable games for Pitt. And they really end up being the difference between a good record and a just okay record, or maybe even something less than just okay. So I don't think there's any issue holding on to some anger about that. Let's see here. Big Cliff says there's a lot of potential sitting on the bench right now. Who makes an impact next year on defense that we haven't heard a lot about so far? Solomon DeShields, Bengali Kamara, Judson Tallender, Aiden Henningham, who could be a DB or a wide receiver. Those are the ones that Big Cliff mentions. Yeah, I think DeShields and Kamara both as outside linebackers look like they have a lot of promise. I mean, those guys are making plays on special teams. They look really good. And, there are rave reviews coming out about those guys. I think those are guys you can get excited about. I think Dayon Hayes is going to be a stud. I think Bam Brema is going to be really good. I think DeAndre Jules has been on the field a bit and shown some potential. Brandon Hill, was one of those guys I would have mentioned if Paris Ford hadn't left the team. I would have been like, that's a guy that is probably going to have a good chance to be a really good player here. Well, he stepped in and he did it at Florida State. We talked about him last week. There's a lot of good young talent on this defense. I think A.J. Woods is showing some of his potential. I think Javonte Royal is really intriguing. I think it'll be interesting to see if Aiden Henningham ends up at linebacker or wide receiver. I think he's doing a little bit of both right now, it seems like. So they've restocked this defense. I think this defense has some depth, has some talent. There's some young guys who don't have a lot of experience right now, but they're going to get out on the field. They're going to play, and I think they're going to make plays and be pretty good. Let's see. Along those lines, RJ Seaman38 says, can we trust Pat Narduzzi to assess when to play young guys? Clearly dropped the ball on that front, specifically the Boston College and NC State games. I think more insight from you on this topic, please. So Pat Narduzzi said after the Boston College game that they needed to rotate the defensive backs, the cornerbacks, more than they did. That they left Jason Pinnock and Marquez Williams out there too much, and he took accountability for that. He took the blame for that. He said, I needed to get those guys rotated more. And then he did. The games after Boston College, the Miami game, the Notre Dame game, the Florida State game, they rotated the corners a lot, as much as they could. The Florida State game, they didn't have Pinnock, and they didn't have Marquez Williams. So they had to go with Eric Hallett and A.J. Woods, played the bulk of the snaps. Rashad Battle got out there a little bit too. But since that Boston College game, they've rotated a lot more than they did prior to that game, and they've rotated, I think, as much as they could. Here's what I would say about personnel, and this is tough, and fans don't always like this perspective, and I can understand why, but this is what I always say. Coaches want to win games. They really do. More than you want them to win games, they want to win games because, their whole livelihood is resting on it. They want to win games, and they're going to play the guys that they believe give them the best chance to win games. And sometimes those decisions, they'll be wrong. You know what I mean? Sometimes they'll be a really good player that they leave on the bench because they don't think they can help them win games, and it turns out they actually could. That happens. It happens at every level. It happens in college. It happens in high school. It happens in pro football. But I think what coaches do is they go into Saturdays or Sundays if it's the NFL or Fridays if it's high school, but they go into Saturdays if it's college football and say, okay, who are the guys over the last week, or over the last 2 weeks, or over the body of their careers have shown us that we can rely on them to be on the field, to do what they're supposed to do their jobs, and to make plays? Who are the guys who, in the classroom, in the film room, on the practice field, have shown us that we can count on them to do what they're supposed to do and make plays? And if there's a guy that they don't think they can count on, they're not going to play them, or they're going to play them very little. And that can be frustrating to fans because, look, I mean, as sports fans, there's nothing we love more than the unseen player, right? What do they always say? The backup quarterback's the most popular guy in town. We don't know if the backup quarterback can actually play. We just know we don't want to see the starting quarterback anymore. So why not give the backup a few reps and see what he can do? Coaches don't think like that. Coaches very rarely throw a guy on the field to see what he can do. They will sometimes, from time to time, but very rarely will they just see what a guy can do. They need to be convinced by how the guy conducts himself in the film room, how he studies, how he looks on the practice field. Rightly or wrongly, that's how coaches operate. And so what I always feel when I come back, on personnel issues, when we talk about personnel issues, I always kind of have that caveat of like, yeah, it seems to me that this guy should be playing or that guy should be playing. But what do I know? I don't see these players. I don't interact with these players. I don't try to coach these players. nearly as much as the coaches do. And so I'm not going to sit here and say defer to the coaches, but to some extent I kind of do, because they've got a lot riding on these teams being successful. They've got a lot riding on their team being successful. And if they feel like this guy is not the best option to help them be successful, who am I to argue with that? And again, I don't just mean to automatically defer, but who am I to argue about that? I don't know. So that's where I kind of stand on that. Mark Will is asking, what do you think about the Addison kid? I think the Addison kid is great. He's a really good football player. I wouldn't include him in the surprise category because I think we expected him to really be really good. He was a really good recruit. He was maybe the best recruit in Pitt's 2020 recruiting class. I thought he would come in and contribute as a freshman. I didn't know if he would be the leading receiver, but I thought he would play really well and make an impact and get a lot of playing time, and he has. And he's been better than I expected him to be. And I think the really cool thing about Jordan Addison is I think he's been getting better week to week. He had some issues with drops. He leads the team in drops right now. 8 dropped passes, according to Pro Football Focus. But week to week, he's been getting better. And his drops have gone down. I think he's, he had his best game of the season in the Florida State game. Best game of his career. And I think he's a stud. He's really good. I don't think there's any question about that. He's been playing really, really well, and I expect that to continue for the rest of this season and then for the next couple of years. I think, and then you'll see where his career goes after that. So that's what I think about the Addison kid. Like him a whole lot. All right, I think on that note, we'll dial it down here on this week's Panther-Lair Show. Make sure you go to Apparel.com. That's the place to find the best Pitt gear. It's great stuff, high-quality shirts, great designs, great look. Make sure you go check that out. We enjoy the RX. If you're looking for a gluten-free beer, RX out on 65 in Emsworth, that's the place to go. So you definitely want to check them out. And then, of course, you also want to check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, recruiting. We cover it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, we have message boards where you can interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends, Panther-Lair.com. You want to go there for all the latest Pitt recruiting coverage, football coverage, basketball coverage as that season starts up. Pitt, Virginia Tech this Saturday at Heinz Field, 4 o'clock kickoff. We will do a live show after the game is over. Probably 9:30, somewhere around there on Saturday night. We'll have a live stream. We'll talk about the game and share our thoughts. I'll tell you what I thought. You tell me what you thought. So make sure you tune into that. I'll solidify a time as we get closer to Saturday. Make sure you stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com to find out all about that. But we'll do a live stream after the game, talk about it. Assuming the game gets played, we'll be here to talk about it. And make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You're watching the live stream right now. Give a like to the video. We appreciate that. And then, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. We like seeing that as well. So thanks everybody who came out for the live stream. Thanks everybody who's listening to the podcast through the week. And we'll talk to you on Saturday night. Have a great rest of the week. Enjoy the game on Saturday. We'll talk to you after.